Thanks for downloading A Good Read on the Books and Authors podcast. Find more information on our website at bbc.co.uk/Radio4.
Hello, welcome to A Good Read, where my guests today are the writer, broadcaster and performer Ian Marchant and the actor Larry Lamb. Larry's probably best known for playing two very different fathers, the lying, manipulative Archie Mitchell in EastEnders, a performance that won him Best Villain at the 2010 British Soap Awards, and the down-to-earth Mick Shipman in the BBC Three hit comedy Gavin and Stacey. Other recent roles include General McKee in the movie Blood the Last Vampire, and on stage Captain Hook in Peter Pan, another iconic villain, and Frank in Educating Rita. Last year, Larry published the candid autobiography Mummy's Boy. Larry, good to have you on the programme.
Lovely to be here, thank you.
And good to have you here too, Ian Marchant.
It's lovely to be here too.
Ian's writing includes plays, novels and 3 travel memoirs, Parallel Lines, The Longest Crawl and Something of the Night, the last of which was published in January this year. His next book, A Personal History of the British Counterculture, is due out in 2013. Ian has broadcast for Radio 4, Radio 3 and ITV and performs with, I quote, the almost semi-legendary musical comedy act Your Dad and the festival cabaret crew The Village Hall. He teaches creative writing at Birmingham City University. And Ian, your choice of a good read is?
It is How Steeple Sinderby Wanderers Won the FA Cup by J.L. Carr.
Tell us about it. Why do you like it so much?
It's quite short. It's always a good thing.
And it's a great title.
It's a great title, which means that we don't have to worry about giving away the ending. It's about a village football team who win the FA Cup. But it's about the countryside, and it's set in the bleaker end of Lincolnshire, told in the voice of Mr. Gidner, who earns his living writing verses for greeting cards. And it's warm and funny and nostalgic, but it's also, I think, a fairy tale. It's not a sort of real thing, it's a kind of dream.
Larry Lamb, warm, funny, nostalgic?
Oh, God, anything about football just leaves me cold, frankly. I'm a sort of a lapsed football fan. Unfortunately for me, it's all turned into a cult, and when I was a boy, it was a sport. And so as minutes about football, albeit, really cleverly written, cleverly constructed, fascinating sort of story. I'm sure in 1975 or whenever, when it was published, it must have been a sort of an interesting poke in the eye at a sport which then was just, as far as I can recollect, because I wasn't in the country then, was just beginning to be turned into this big business that it is now. Yeah. It had come out of the 60s. And then I'm sure it would have been like a fun poke, whereas now you can't poke fun at football. It takes itself so seriously, and so many people sort of feel that it is now, you've got to have a football team. You'll be talking to regular people that you think are sort of bright and chirpy and interesting and intelligent, and they'll ask you, what team do you support? That's what you ask little boys.
Yeah.
But
you don't ask grown-up people, what team do you support?
Larry, you couldn't possibly be less interested in football than I am. And I loved this book. I thought it was very funny. And frankly, it's not... Well, is it about football? Yes, of course it is. The plot line is about this small village team making it through all the stages finally to Wembley. But it seemed to me, Ian, that actually it's about something else. It's about village life, isn't it? I mean, it's almost a love poem or maybe a love-hate poem to village life.
Yes, it's that as much as it is about football, I think. It's about the bleakness of winter in the countryside, the way he says, you mustn't really have elections in places this small. We just had our town council elections. We had 20 people standing. That's 1% of the population. Yeah. And everybody was really upset with one another. I love it that he says Mr. Fangfoss doesn't allow crime in Steeple Sinderby, so it's run by this kind of farmer. So yes, it's about kind of the countryside versus the town. And I take your point absolutely. When I went to the football as a lad, and I'm afraid I support Brighton and Hove Albion, it was exactly...
Nothing wrong with that.
It was exactly at that point that finally the Corinthian spirit that my dad would play football in and my uncles would play football in had gone, and it was turning into this business.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like amateurism versus professionalism, the countryside versus the town.
Yeah, and I think for me that's when it would have been relevant. I like his style. I like those characters, those extraordinary names that he cooks up, and the fact that you can sort of conjure up an image of them, Mr. Fangfoss and all his dodgy wife.
He's got two wives.
Two wives. Yeah. Well, he's got the wife and the two sisters, aren't they? Yeah. No, they're not two. Yeah. They're not sisters, are they?
Yeah,
they
are sisters.
That's
one he's actually
one is the drudge,
married to.
and the other one that he's actually married to. Yeah.
Yeah.
These wonderful sort of foggy photographs. You can't quite make out what they are. And then on page 46, opposite page 46, there's a photograph, foggy, but of a very beautiful young woman. And who she is never explained. It's as though he got slipped in there by mistake.
Yeah.
But I just laughed out loud. I mean, I did that embarrassing thing of snorting on the underground.
Did you?
And there's, I mean, for instance, this is very early on, but it's Dr. Kossuth is the village schoolmaster, and he's the one who comes up with the brilliant scheme for getting the local football team to Wembley. But he's also got a brilliant scheme for teaching children, and it says, it came to this, his scheme: children need only to be taught how to learn and to remember what they learnt for only as long as the remembrance was of any earthly use. So each Steeple Sinderby child spent 7.5 hours each week learning exact observation, speed reading, knowledge retention, and the bright ones got an important extra: how to let waffle wash over them whilst improving the time by thinking constructively. And I just love that. I thought it was very funny, eccentric.
It's beautiful.
It's proper old-fashioned education, like they teach in European schools, isn't it?
Cart, it has to be faced. Jail Cart is one of my heroes, and he's one of the reasons I wanted to write. And he was a village primary school headmaster by profession. He kept getting nominated for the Booker, and in the end he gave up being a primary school headmaster and turned into a full-time writer and publisher. And his biography is called The Last Englishman, and he had opinions. You know, it's a book full of opinions, full of contempt for bureaucracy.
Yeah.
But also very up-to-date contempt for celebrity culture. I mean, the moment that Steeple Sinderby Wanderers sort of start climbing towards the FA Cup, the press descend on them. And it's just, that feels really contemporary. There's a wonderful description of how the Sun journalist, who clearly doesn't even go to the village, but invents this idea of how village yokels would be.
Yes.
And it's just... That all felt very topical to me, even though this is over a quarter of a century old. I think most people, wouldn't they, Ian, wouldn't they know Carr from his, a novel, a novella, A Month in the Country? Very sweet, gentle, nostalgic love story.
Yes, I think that's the best known one. And there's one called The Harpole Report as well, and they've both just been dramatised actually on Radio 4.
And actually the narrator of this story, Mr. Gidner, is a very interesting character. We never quite know what he's been up to. But he was in a seminary. He was obviously studying for the priesthood, and then he refers to my trouble. And he had to leave the seminary. We never learn what his trouble was.
That's one of the things I like. Yes, you know, what his trouble. I like as well very much what I suppose you could call the sex scene between he and Ginchy Trigger, where
lovely young Ginchy Trigger, a journalist,
where all he says is it was lovely at the time, but afterwards I always feel sad. That, you know, for me, that's what a sex scene should be.
And Ginchy is such a wonderful character. She graduates from being the local journalist doing sports reports in print to actually sort of, you know, doing the commentary at football matches. And she clearly hasn't got the faintest idea. Apart from the fact that she keeps sort of saying, I think they're going up the pitch or down the pitch, or she's totally incoherent. But then when it gets really interesting, she goes silent because she's so busy watching and the commentary just comes to a grinding halt. I mean, you must admit, Larry, it is a very pleasurable, enjoyable, slightly sad maybe, but enjoyable read.
It didn't grab me comedically as I thought it would do. I don't know, it was a bit sort of shaggy doggy for me, you know, and
it is a bit shaggy doggy, but I think in our hearts we want that time when footballers were kind of proper men who worked in proper jobs and earned their money.
And that is very good about those local characters. That one who was a footballer, what was his name? Is it Simpkins or somebody? The one that,
Alex
Slingsby, and he'd been a footballer and he'd sort of disappeared off the map and then came back as a sort of a ringer. Swift, I think it was.
Played for Aston Villa, did Slingsby?
Yeah.
We've been talking about how Steeple's Sinderby Wanderers won the FA Cup by J.L. Carr. And you're listening to A Good Read, where my guests today are Ian Marchant and Larry Lamb. Larry, what have you chosen for your book?
I chose Dirt Music by Tim Winton. I'm always intrigued and invariably highly amused by Ozzy's use of English. And like, if you've got a really skillful writer like him, it's a kind of an amazing ride into their vernacular. That other world of the wonderful use of that language, like Irish, in the same way they do different things with the same form of communication. And his characters really grab me, and they're sort of, I don't know, they're kind of impressionistic. They're not completely drawn in. He lets you sort of figure the rest out for yourself, but they're very vivid. Georgie, the central girl, and Luther, the mystical guy, straight away. There's always this air of mystery with him, right from the offset. I wanted to follow him, and then I think what it is for me, I lived in Nova Scotia in Canada for a long time, and a very important part of my young life. And for me, those stories that come from those sort of places always fascinate me, and this one was just a cracker right the way through.
Ian, very different from Steeple Sinderby Wanderers. It's a love story set, as Larry says, on the edge of Australia, in many respects on the edge. I mean, it's a fishing town, but they're their own people. They don't have much to do with anybody else. What did you make of it?
Well, I've got a mate at home, actually, who works 6 months of the year on the coast of Western Australia. He works on pilot boats, bringing people in and out of the harbour. And I talked to him about it, and he said that he kind of loved it, and he knew those places. And I really wanted to go to those places. It's so full of vivid description of the landscape. I really, really wanted to go there. But I also kind of hated it. But I hated it because it's...
Well, you hated the book.
I hated the book, yeah. But it was kind of full of this kind of tricksy sort of literary stuff, like no speech marks. Why no speech marks? So does that help the reader? I couldn't see how it helped kind of at all.
Oh, you're making me so sad, Ian. I think this is the most stunning, terrific book. There's a bit just towards the end where it kind of loses control, it drifts a bit, and it's sort of as though Tim Winton either doesn't want to end it or doesn't quite know how to end it. But for the most part, it gave me so much pleasure. I thought there was a brilliant sense of place, of the landscape and the seascape, but also of this fishing town. I mean, it was, it's kind of this seething mass of virility and ugliness and racism and wit. It's just... I felt as though I'd been there. I mean, I just thought it's so brilliantly drawn.
I've never been to Australia, and I've got lots of work with Aussies all my life, and it's like when you're amongst, for example, Texans, the way Texans use the language and live in that out of way place, but it's very, very definitely a form of English that's developed over hundreds of years, and it's that strange wordplay and that strange otherworldliness they've got. It's nothing to do with us at all. The only connection is they speak the same language.
I thought the dialogue was kind of one of the best things, if only he'd put in speech marks in order to kind of guide
you
through
could follow it, couldn't you, without speech marks?
I could follow it, but unlike all the Aussies I know, there were no jokes, not one. And everyone's got cancer. Everyone's arms falls off. Everyone's only got one leg. The whole thing. Everyone's mum is dead. Everyone's dad is horrible. These awful lives, kind of free from... Plus...
Okay. It isn't a comedy.
No, I admit that. But Aussies are funny. I did think he might have, just here and there, in order to capture... Aussies, the ones I met, are funny and clever. And these ones weren't. But very real to life. I suppose there's one point at which Luther Fox says, never trust a non-swimmer. And that's so me. I can't swim. So I thought, oh, that's me. You don't trust me. And I just didn't trust it.
I think Luther he's a very interesting character, and you know that lots of bad things have gone on in his past and you want to work out what they are. But what I found so interesting was how well the central female character, Georgie, was drawn. In fact, she is the heart of the book.
She is.
And it's kind of, to me, like a bit like there's a novel by Annie Proulx called The Shipping News, which is set in Newfoundland.
Exactly, in Newfoundland.
And that's landscape, it's men, it's fishermen, and she, a female writer, has a male protagonist. Yeah. And I just thought Tim Winton, who does the mirror thing with his female protagonist, I thought he did her very convincingly. I mean, maybe I'm in the best position to say that, but I utterly believed her. She's not entirely nice. She does some really stupid things occasionally.
She's a tough cookie, that one.
A tough cookie, and also silly. She lets her husband manipulate her occasionally.
I thought she was brilliantly done. In fact, in the end, the thing that I thought about more than anything was taste. It was clear to me that this was brilliant. It was also clear to me that I really didn't like it. Yeah. And it's sort of not terribly usefully, not always clear why you like things and why you don't. That's something about taste that can't be accounted for. I suppose as well it's the kind of poetic languagey thing. He says at one moment, the road is like a quartzy river. I'm going, it isn't. And what does a quartzy river look like anyway? It's that sort of imagery.
The language isn't always, in fact, I think very, very rarely is it poetic like that. There's, for instance, and this really is just one of many instances, there's a scene quite early on where Georgie goes swimming with Luther Fox's dog. And I just think this is great, unpoetic writing. It says, unleashed, the dog flashed out across the sand in a mad, tangle-footed arc. Georgie belted down to the water and ploughed in blind. She felt the percussion of the dog hitting the water behind her and struck out in her lazy schoolgirl freestyle until she was amidst moored lobster boats with their fug of corrosion and bird shit and pilchards. Behind her the dog snuffed along gamely, snout up, with a bow wave you could feel on your back. I mean, that is
you're in
writing
there in the water with him.
Absolutely, and it's precise. It's
if you can swim.
That's not fancy writing, is it? It's not.
He does this thing where he switches the voice into the present. When it's Luther Fox, Georgie's written in the past, Luther's written in the present. Again, I couldn't quite see why.
But towards the end, Luther Fox leaves for an island at the north of Australia, and in fact he's stripping himself down to nothing. It's a kind of, I suppose you could say it's a slow form of suicide or something he's doing. But I really find that kind of story, it's Robinson Crusoe, when somebody's on an island like that, they've got to construct a life for themselves. He's building a camp, he's making sure he's got a water supply, he goes out hunting. He even in one amazing scene starts playing with the sharks.
That's great.
That is just the most stunning.
And he laughs at that point as well.
Yes, he laughs so much,
relieved.
he has hiccups.
Yes, I thought, oh, good, that's funny.
But there is some kind of attraction, isn't there, about that? I mean, I would never in my life be able to survive 2 days on a desert island, certainly not with sharks around.
I would. That's it. That's what. Oh yeah. That's the sort of thing. See, that's what I love about it. It's a sort of got a really cinematic style. That cut to where he disappears out of the story, and then he picks you up, and there you are in Robinson Crusoe land. I just love that sort of thing.
We've been talking about Dirt Music by Tim Winton. Now, my choice of book, and I really will not be surprised if neither of you likes this. I can quite see why you mightn't. It's this is a kind of laughing away, Larry. It's a kind of response or a sort of variation on Bret Easton Ellis's novel American Psycho, which notoriously was a satire on greed in 1980s America, but it notoriously had a lot of scenes of really unpleasant viciousness and cruelty towards women of a sexual nature. And this book also, I mean, less extremely, but it does have images of sexual violence against women. It's called African Psycho, this novel. It's by a 40-something Congolese French writer called Alain Mabankou. And his protagonist, his narrator, this young Congolese guy, very poor. He works as a panel beater, lives in this slummy part of the city. You know, the streets running with sewage, there are rats and just casual street violence all over the place. And his big dream is to be a serial killer. He fantasises about being not just a serial killer, but a serial killer big enough to make the national press, big enough to make television. And the novel is a satire. It's a satire on the media. It's a satire on, in fact, local government corruption and inefficiency. It's also a really, I think, a very well-controlled cry of anger on behalf of people living in terrible poverty. And it's got a lot of energy in the writing. I mean, it tips into being obscene quite often. But it's very energetic, I think terrific, powerful writing. And the protagonist, this young wannabe serial killer, I think is a really engaging character. Ian.
Oh, you're quite right. I absolutely hated it. And maybe it is because I couldn't see the satirical side. I felt a bit inadequate because I felt, gosh, I don't know enough about African writing, really. I felt I am not getting this because I couldn't sympathise with him or empathise with him in any way. The descriptions of the things that he wanted to do to women were just horrific. And his aspiration to be like his hero, who's Angualima, isn't he? I thought, well, he's horrible, you're horrible. I sound like this kind of terrible old fusterian, you know, he's an awful man. Why would we want to be like him? But I just hated it. And I sat there sort of banging the table, hated it.
Larry, did you hate it as much as that?
Oh, every bit as much. And for the same reasons, funnily enough. I don't want to know what's going on in a psycho, freaky serial killer or wannabe serial killer's mind, wherever he is. And I have a real huge sadness for... It's a terrible... Well, no, it's a generalisation. I've been to Africa a few times, and I feel terribly ashamed of what European colonialism has done to that extraordinary continent. And I wonder, reading this, how much of what this is about is to do with what we've left there and what would have been there without our interference.
Well, that's,
and I've
that's
got a
very
feeling,
interesting. I wondered that too, how much you're supposed to see him as the result of the horrors of colonialism.
And what goes on the
actually,
streets of that town.
But what's so interesting is that this kid, the character, has obviously had a really terrible childhood. His mother abandoned him in the streets as a baby. He's been brought up by a whole lot of foster parents, some of whom were obviously not too bad. But he's this kid who's had to survive on the streets from very early on, and he's rough and he's nasty in a lot of ways. But he doesn't blame, this is what's so interesting in terms of if he is a symbol for Africa, he's not blaming anybody for it. He doesn't say, in fact, he quite specifically says, look, I've read all the books, the psychology books. I make choices. I am not what I am because of my past. I'm making choices. And I think the book it's kind of moved beyond being interested anymore in colonialism and the wrongs of colonialism. It's kind of a new generation of writers who's saying we've got to look at our own problems, haven't we?
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting. And so I almost thought this is a Republic of Congolese book for Republic of Congolese people. I could see it. But I agree entirely with Larry. It's a part of the world which is still being treated in the most terrible way.
Did you read the King Leopold's Ghost that tells the story of why Congo became the Congo? It literally was, this bloke who was suddenly made. They needed a king, right? So they get this sort of aristo from somewhere, make him the king, and he says, "Well, everybody else has got their bit of Africa. I want one. I'm going to take all the bit that's left."
King Leopold was the biggest landowner on earth.
Absolutely,
it didn't belong to the Belgian state. It belonged to him. So I can see why something like this might be interested for people in Africa who are interested in African literature. I think in the West, we still need slapping round the face. We still need to know about coltan and diamonds and cobalt and where it comes from and what's happening in the world.
Absolutely.
Can I just put in
Sorry,
a word?
we're ranting.
We are ranting.
No, well, I think the novel is a rant. I think it's a different rant from the one you two are having. And I also think that it's a rant with humour, and I quite accept that neither of you is going to go along with this. But it's I mean, from the very beginning, you know that this guy, he's called Grégoire Nakubomayo, you know that he is never going to commit all these murders that he wants to commit. I mean, the book opens with him saying, I've decided to kill Germaine on December the 29th. I've been thinking about this for weeks. Whatever one may say about it, killing someone requires both psychological and logistical preparedness. I believe I've now reached the necessary state of mind, even if I have yet to choose the means by which I will do the deed. And 100 pages later, he's still wondering whether to use a knife or a gun. And if he uses a gun, it suddenly occurs to him he needs to be able to aim properly.
We don't care.
I don't care about that. I don't want to know what's going in the mind of a serial killer.
But doesn't it hint to you, as it does to me, that he's never going to be a serial killer? He wants to be.
The fact that he might talk about wanting to be, I think, is such a terrible sadness. How can anybody want to be a serial killer, even if they're only joking?
I don't think he's joking. I think the author is saying, I think it's a joke is probably, I think it is a satire. It's a satire on, what do you do if you've got nothing and you want to be noticed?
Well,
and
not become a serial killer?
One solution, isn't it?
No, I can see that. You know, that it was a sort of fame. But he hasn't got nothing because he's got his own business that he's really proud in. He's got, as he says, this house that I built with my own hands. I just still want to hear a story about Africa that continually confronts us in the West. I think we need waking up every single day. Every time we turn on our mobile phone, we've got to go, hang on, where does this come from?
But if you were an African novelist, Ian, wouldn't you think, listen, I'm not put on earth necessarily to write books that are going to make lefty British people feel better about things.
No, but I don't want to feel better.
Even to make lefty people feel worse about things.
No, it's very easy to do. Yes, I'm constantly feeling worse about myself. No, you're right. But I'm not an African writer. And so I was haunted throughout by the feeling that just maybe if I knew more about African writing, I could see how I might be excited by this and think, yes, we've moved beyond colonialism and yes, it's an interesting response to Bret Easton Ellis, which I couldn't see, actually.
We've been talking about African Psycho by Alain Mabankou, which is translated from the French by Christine Schwartz-Hartley and published by Serpent's Tail at $7.99. Also on the programme, we were talking about how Steeple's Sinderby Wanderers won the FA Cup by J.L. Carr, which is published by Quince Tree Press at $6.99, and Tim Winton's Dirt Music from Picador at $7.99. To my guests, Larry Lamb and Ian Marchant, many thanks. And to you, thanks for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed this programme. You can find more readings, drama and reviews at bbc.co.uk/Radio4.